Hello, my name is Alexis, and in this video, I'm going to talk about a bit about three popular large foundation large language models that are used for AI, and they can be used in different tasks and have different capabilities. Each one of them is a little bit different, so I'll be talking about the differences, and I'll also be showcasing these functionalities um, with showing 10 different novel use cases. I'll talk about things such as images, text, code generation, um, and also talk about using these models for a small project that I was working on. So in this notebook titled Multimodal Foundation Models, I'll go over the three main models that I chose or was assigned to me by my professor. So it's Google's Gemini 1.5, there is Anthropic's Claude, and finally there is ChatGPT 4.0. So as you can see, Google's Gemini 1.5 was used for a sample data science project. I asked it to look at this sample data. This data is freely available and you can access it using Vega datasets, or you can just synthesize your own data. I asked it to look at this data and tell me what it believes to be the reason for why there is a positive correlation between horsepower and weight in pounds. And Gemini responded with heavier cars often require more powerful engines to achieve comparable acceleration and performance to lighter cars. It explains this is due to inertia, and then it gives different reasons. And each bulleted reason could be a hypothesis test of its own. However, since I just wanted to showcase some of this capability, I only chose one of them, and I wanted to hypothesis test. I asked Gemini to hypothesis test one of the theories relating to this correlation between horsepower and weight in pounds. So I asked it to create a bootstrapping A/B test, and I asked it to check whether any of the data in the cars, if it's whether SUV or truck, which one has a significantly significant reason for having that positive correlation. However, as you can see, the results showed that it is not informative, as the data does not contain a feature that provides a clear distinction between cars that are SUVs and or trucks. So the data was missing this column that is SUV or truck. So Gemini found a workaround and it generated its own feature. However, it was kind of naive, and it assumed that the name tag for the feature of the name of the car contained SUV or truck within it, which it did not. It has only the model name. So then it had to search for different models of cars and whether they are SUV or truck. So it provided this code. It assumed that it would be some of these models, and that the name would be looking something like this. However, still none of those keywords were in the data. So it seemed to look outside of the data. It didn't really look into the data and then search using that data. With just a simple prompt, it was not able to exactly guess from the names inside the data. So this was a good effort. It may not have evaluated or pre-processed the data. It may not have used retrieval augmented generation or done or ran some of its own code to search for these keywords. So another capability is I asked Gemini to provide code to call the Claude API with a sample prompt. So since I wanted to look at Claude within the Jupyter Notebook, I decided wouldn't it be fun to ask Gemini to prompt another model, and it did. It gave me the code and it seemed to work. All I needed to do was provide the key for Claude, and afterward I only had to make a minor change to the prompt to get it to work. So I asked it to search for an image of a setosa. This capability was not completely working, since it seems that Claude is not able to search for images within itself. It has visual perception in the way that you feed it an image, and then it can look at that image that you uploaded, but it cannot search the internet. So this is simply something that can be fixed by using an outside internet searching tool, providing a function to Claude, or uploading your own image. So then I asked Claude to provide code that would allow an auxiliary connection by using a tool to search the internet without asking the AI itself to search the internet. So then it provided me some code, and then separately I wanted to ask Claude to prepare a custom search API from Google. There are tools out there that already can search Google using different libraries. However, I wanted to see if it was possible for Claude to ask me the steps in building it from scratch. And afterwards, I asked Claude specifically how to get step 7 set up, since it seemed that it asked for a custom search engine ID. However, it was kind of vague, since the search section of Google to create your own API is kind of confusing. So I asked it a little bit more detail, and it clarified for me that there's a difference between the Auth 2.0 client ID versus the Google search engine ID. And lastly, I asked Claude to help me call GPT-4o API with Python code. And there is a difference between all these different models in the way that you call them. There are small differences, however, there is a difference. For example, you have to call OpenAI.completion.create instead of client.messages.create. And this is a difference in the way that the chat generation results and the JSON output. So I was able to call the chat GPT-4o, and I asked it, can you describe the image at this link? Similarly to when I asked Claude, it cannot look at links from the internet, and you would have to upload the code as raw data. So it would also benefit from a tool to search the internet. Secondly, I'll show you 10 different examples of large multimodal context input in Gemini. So I called Gemini API, and I asked it a simple question to see if the function was working. It seemed to work, and it even was able to output in Spanish. I tested it using the previous model, not the Gemini 1.5 Flash, which is the LCI model, and this is much better response than I was getting in English and in the previous prompt in Spanish. And I asked it another prompt, this time using a PDF uploading function to upload larger text input. So it combines the regular text prompt and the PDF text. And then this function prints it nicely. The text is not really human readable when you receive it from the JSON, so this helps out a little bit. And these are the 10 examples. So I uploaded 2 separate files in Google Drive, and then I downloaded it in the notebook, and then Gemini can use these paths to look at the text. So I asked it who is the author and who is the publisher. It is something that you cannot read from the title alone, so it would have to process it from the text contained within the PDF. And it did it successfully. This is the author and this is the publisher. I asked it to summarize the book, and it seemed to summarize it very succinctly. It only gave a 1-sentence summarization. So it was tough to know whether it's actually a good summary of the book. To me, it seems to be a good summary. It is a very simple kids book, so there's not much to say. However, in the next example, you'll see there's more text, and it still did a really good job. So in this use case, I asked it to list all the characters from the storybook. There's not that many characters in the storybook, and the ones that were in it, it found were correct. And another use case is I asked it to talk about the moral takeaway, or kind of like something that can be learned from the story. And it showed that it talks about imagination, creativity, humor, friendship, acceptance, and open-mindedness, and resilience, specifically about in a classroom with a teacher and their children and their students, and how children like to play pranks, and this gets in the way of classroom teaching in some way. However, the teacher handles it very nicely, and they all end happily ever after. Use case 5, the storybook. I asked it to talk about potential images in the PDF that were not present. So, for example, the function that I provided to Gemini to extract the text from the PDF was not able to extract the images, and that would be a separate use case. However, I wanted to see if it could imagine what the images would look like given the text. And then it did really well. It actually separated it based on the pages and described how for each page there's a separate image that could be provided or imagined. And after looking at the PDF myself, it seemed to follow similar imagery, however not exactly the same. And the imagery in the original book is a little bit nicer. This is an open access book, so you would be able to look at the book yourself and compare the two. And use case 6, I asked Gemini to provide the citation in MLA format for this paper. This is a new paper, not the children's book. And this is a research paper, so it's completely longer text, completely different audience than the previous children's textbook. And it provided a really good MLA format citation. Use case 7, I asked it to ask if this paper provides any code examples, since it talks about studying human behavior with virtual reality and Unity experiment framework. So Unity is a gaming framework, a gaming software tool used to create games. So I wanted to see if it had any code examples. It said that this paper describes the tool, its uses, and its potential in creating experiments. It does provide a simple example of C #code, but it mainly focuses on high-level descriptions. So next up, I asked it, since there are very few examples of code, I want to know if the Unity experiment framework mentioned, specifically regarding the 2-block Tentra experiment, if it talks about any experiments that can be ran with this framework. And it does, and there's a lot of output here, so I assume there's many mention of this framework with regard to different experiments. And this is interesting, as virtual reality is a relatively new way of gaming that I feel like has not really reached popularity yet. However, there is different experiments that can be trialed with this framework. And use case 9, I asked it, since there's a lot of information about the paper's main topic being the experiment research framework, I asked it if the authors experimented with the framework themselves, like if they make the game using Unity. And it talks about how this paper doesn't really mention much of any actual experiments using the UXF framework. It talks about the UXF software framework. However, it does not really show any implementations, really. It talks about a case study where they built a virtual swinging room experiment for one particular aspect of postural sway. However, it says this wasn't a really detailed experiment. So lastly, I asked it to see if the authors mentioned any roadblocks or potential future research related to UXF. It says that there was not much talk about roadblocks or potential future research. However, they mentioned that they plan to work on maintaining this framework for compatibility with future versions of Unity and adding or modifying features. And I think this last block where it talks about potential future research might be related or generated by Gemini and not really brought up in the paper, since it doesn't cite the authors. So I thought this was cool that Gemini talks about potential future research despite there not being any mentioned in the paper. Okay, and now I'll talk about the code generation abilities of Claude. So originally Claude was used to create these 3 sample books and their contents, and it did a really great job in setting up the back end and the front end UI. Originally it was just these 3 books and not much prompting was required. There was some minor errors that I had to fix myself. However, mostly Claude was able to do a great job with a simple prompt and a simple project idea. However, I'll show you the chat transcript. I asked it for much more functionality than was originally in the Part B video, and I asked it to create a new login page for potential users. I asked it to create a sign out functionality, and this will go along with the login page. I asked it to generate a navigation bar containing the sign out button previously made, and then I asked it to add a search toolbar to filter the books, and this would also encapsulate the navigation and the sign out bar. So a lot of modifications were made to the original code base, and each one is a use case, as it adds different minor features to accomplish the main functionality that I wanted. So now we'll talk about how it actually implemented it. You can see there's a navigation bar here. It actually moved the title of the project to the navigation bar, which I thought was neat, even though I didn't ask it to. It also encapsulated the sign out button and the search toolbar like I wanted. The search functionality is great. And another cool feature that I didn't expect is that each time you enter in a character in the search toolbar, the color of the book changes. I asked it to create random colors for the books, so I think this is unintended effect, but I think it looks fun. It also added this library book header, and all the functionality that was in the original code base is still there, so nothing was broken after the new features were added. The sign out functionality works, and then the login functionality works as well. This could all be extended by adding more users and more books and longer content. However, I think it looks really nice. So yeah, that would be all for this video. Thank you for watching.